Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. Today we have another review video for you. This is for Hauler by Eric Kruger, and this forms part of my indie author August that I'm taking part of, that was created by the amazing Kevin Toll Reads and is being co-hosted by Nicole over at Nicole's Bookish Nook. So, disclosure first off, Eric reached out to me to see if I'd be interested in reviewing this one. After reading the blurb, sounded like my jam. After reading it, it most definitely was. So I did receive an ebook copy of this for free. The paperback for this comes in at 350 pages, the ebook 280, and this first released in December of 2020 and is book one in the Benjamin Drake Adventure series and is a near future sci-fi. We shall start by taking a look at the story before moving on to the characters, the world building, the presentation, and my final thoughts at the end. So let's just dive straight in. Also, this is being done as one take. Let's see how badly this goes. So we'll start with the story. And it's a relatively straightforward one. Benjamin Drake is a hauler, basically a slightly in the future version of a truck driver who falls on some bad times. This is due to some of his own bad habits, to be completely fair. He ends up missing the timelines for a job, costing his employer, for want of a better word, they tend to be freelancers, a bit of money, and he starts to run out of credits. He's approached by somebody that they know has a bit of a bad rep. They try and avoid getting involved with them, but they do need the money. So jokingly, kind of, they say, "Oh no, you're paying me this much, you'll pay me double that." And the guy just went, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And he ends up stuck. And what you then have is this situation with these two characters traveling together for a period of time to deliver a consignment, while more and more things are revealed to do with this consignment that they've picked up, which is probably not through legitimate means. And over the course of the story, the scope of this really does expand really, really well. Now, in terms of how this story works, I really, really like how low stakes this initially feels and how it organically builds up to a potentially literally world-changing extent. There's quite a lot going on here under the hood with reveals and bits of world building, corporate espionage and competition, all that sort of stuff. And it works really well at starting as what just feels like a slightly dodgy job picked up in desperation to something that is actually really significant. Works really, really well for this. And the way that it just organically builds, it just works. But that's the story. What about the characters? So Benjamin Drake is, or appears to be, a relatively good-looking man, probably approaching middle age, or in middle age, I should say, who has been driving for years. He drives an old truck. He does it more than anything else for the love of driving, and that comes through so often through this. He doesn't see himself as necessarily a criminal, but as is suggested for many other haulers, they work on the edges of society in sort of the grey areas that aren't quite legislated yet. But does have a moral code, does have a level of loyalty to people around him, previous contracts, stuff like that. So as he starts to make his choices, you kind of get the sense of regret going in as they begin to get involved with these new people that he already knew about. And then you really do get a sense of someone who is a very good trucker and is relatively savvy in the way of the world, but is way in over their head. Now, on top of him, you do have Lieutenant Lily Wells. So Lieutenant Wells is actually on the job investigating something involving Drake's new partner in this, and very much has been pulled from a case previously for a mistake that they made and are desperate to prove themselves. And as, again, they go through this, we discover most of the twists through her in many regards, as she begins to uncover a number of things involving corruption within the security services and the various corporations as well, that also affects her job and people around her. Ambitious, very much married to the job. Does have an eye for the men. That comes up a couple of times, so quite interesting, but also really bullheaded and really does trust their own instincts. The other one is Drake's accomplice partner, who I'm not going to name here. You'll understand why. And I really like that you have this character who kind of has fallen into this criminal life, is really not as bright as they think they are, very much taken advantage of, very much seen in the horror community as somebody that you don't get involved with because of the sort of work that he gives. But as the relationship develops, as Drake gets to know them properly beyond their own reputation, you almost have like an older, younger sibling dynamic sort of working, or even maybe to a lesser extent, a father-son dynamic there, as this is a character that is out of their depth and in many ways feels like they're looking for validation, and makes them the highlight for me of this tale, especially when they begin to misconstrue things that they're hearing, which makes complete sense with their history. And then they are shown to actually, in very specific circumstances, be hyper competent. Really liked that. There's a number of other characters that work as foils for our protagonists in here as well. They don't get overly fleshed out, although some get more time than others, and that's going to lead into the later books. But they all fill very specific niches, be though they ambitious, megalomaniac company owners, security personnel, or people who have hired Drake and other people in the past. And more layers are added to them as we get more and more reveals to do with levels of corruption and the conspiracy that's going on. So overall, I really do like the character work here. The dynamic between our three main characters is really well done, especially in the way that it organically builds. Onto the world building and the setting then, this isn't quite cyberpunk. What I mean by that is that this very much feels like the beginnings of cyberpunk before we go full throttle with it. We have a world that is now run by corporations after they bought out the government. The corporations kind of undercut each other. They're very much in competition with each other. There's some that are more scrupulous than others. But we're not quite there with them being completely out of control yet. There are also little hints of like the biotech or the personal tech. The word is currently escaping me. The bioenhancements. There we go. There are bits in here of tech which looks like quite early on. So, for example, Drake has stuff implanted into his skin to help him control his truck. But it's very, very early doors. So this very much does bridge the gap between what you class as modern day and true cyberpunk. And I like that because it's not very often you get that full-on cyberpunk sort of stage in many stories. So that works really well. I like the idea that this does feel like a transitional phase in the world, both from the point of view of the corporations. You've got colonization of Mars going on. You get information as well to do with the moon and how that's just a hollowed out hunk of rock. You get the idea of monopolies with these companies as well, and the various different competitions that they have and how they try to undercut each other, or in particular undercut the smaller companies trying to move up and buy them out, the level of aggression there. And this leads into their personalized security services and how those work and how corrupt or straight-laced they are, as well as certain places that we visit, which are very much almost like show home cities where they just don't let anybody in. Really interesting. Again, very much feels like the step just below true cyberpunk, and I really like that. This isn't a dystopia yet, or at least doesn't feel like one. It feels like it's on that slippery slope, though. So that's really, really good. I also like the fact that there's so much focus on the technology and the driving, which makes sense considering we're following a hauler. We're following a near future truck driver, and looking at the way the roads work, how the tech interacts with that, how when you pass into these different things, you've got terms and conditions to enter these places. And that works really, really well as well to me. So that's great. And then again, leaning into the character work, you have this gradual revelation on how the companies are interacting and what's really going on, which really does sell the nature of this is a world that's in its early stages, really, at this point, of being controlled by the corporations and how that might look and how badly that could go for humanity. So again, the world building works really, really well. And there's a lot of time in here for this to build up gradually. The idea of people having these hacked units, believing that they can just talk to each other off the grid, but the corporations are already one step ahead, as an example of that one. So that was really, really good as well. Of course, that fetches us onto the presentation. The cover that I have it in the thumbnail, I think, is the original cover. There is a more up-to-date one. I actually prefer the original one with the design of the truck personally, but that's just me. I'm not quite sure why. I can't put my finger on it. There's nothing wrong with the new cover. There's just something about the way the truck looks that just works better for me. Again, most of this I've already touched, but in terms of the writing, the organic nature of the storytelling, the natural growth and spread of the story in terms of scope, depth, and complexity works exceptionally well here. And you do get these really human moments, and you, especially in the relationships that Drake has, that's where this really, really does shine, because Drake is perhaps the most human of our three main characters, which sounds like a weird thing to say. They are all human, but very much a relatable person, just a normal guy who gets sucked into stuff, but doesn't let it get on top of him. And I really, really liked that. You get good descriptions of the world, although it is not too in depth, which is also a good thing. But the time spent just talking a little bit about the tech really does sell how this world is. And the various differences between the locales that they go to as well, or the truckers' bars, and how every area has these seedy areas. It really does drive home how this world is. So the writing really does support our three main pillars here. And that's really, really impressive to me because it felt so jam-packed. I got to the halfway point and I felt like I'd been reading this for ages. And I mean that in a good way, because it has so much depth to it. And that's a testament to Kruger's writing here, to be able to pass that much information without it feeling like exposition dumps is really, really impressive. So that just leaves me then with my final thoughts. I really, really enjoyed this. It's quite nice to see a late stage capitalist society that isn't cyberpunk yet. Really like that. And I do really, really love, genuinely, how this just feels like a normal job gone wrong and how it spirals. Right at the start, it just felt like a run of the mill taking a bad job. It's a little bit dodgy. And it just spreads. And after it spreads a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And I really like that. And it keeps pulling you along all the way. There is a twist towards this. Could kind of see it coming. But again, with the characters that are involved, it does make sense. I am very, very curious. I will be picking up book 2. I think there's 4 books out at the time of recording. But I really, really enjoyed this one. I think if you like a pretty standard in many regards sci-fi, but that does the level of progression exceptionally well, that has an engaging core cast of characters, and just enough mystery in there to keep you hooked all the way through without feeling like you're being preached or exposition dumped on, I think Hauler by Eric Kruger is well worth checking out. But there we go. That's my thoughts on Hauler by Eric Kruger. Have you read any of these series? Does this sound interesting to you? Or have you read anything similar to this? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all very soon.